you very much indeed for everybody who's attending. Now, where to begin to introduce John? Well, first of all, John is a very long-standing friend. I mustn't say old friend, because that's ageist, as a girlfriend told me. Long-standing, so he's very long-standing, dear friend of both Hywel and I, and we've done many good trips together, including getting lost on one mountain because we were far too busy discussing the merits of Mars bars and had to have an interesting descent. However, John began his first trip to the Alpine in 1956, but having a quick scurry around the web, there's some wonderful pictures of him as a schoolboy in, cord jackets and breeches and a rope and slung over the shoulder in true old rock climbing style. So they're well worth a look. John started, he did a photography course, a degree or college at Guildford. And after that, he then went to go and work for a very prestigious fashion magazine, fashion and socialite magazine called Queen, back in the early 60s. And he took fashion pictures. Probably explains why he's very keen on people dressing appropriately in the mountains, but there we go. He joined a partnership but went freelance in 1969, and since then all his pictures have been freelance, and he's covered a huge range. He's done some excellent walking guides in England. He stayed with us while he was researching deserted medieval villages. He's done some beautiful books for private estates throughout the year, photographing their country house and grounds throughout the year. He's illustrated poetry books, which are just beautiful, as well as mountains. And it's mountains today. And just as a quick plug, can I have that? It's arrived today. We've just discovered it. It's yet another Cleare book. We've got quite a few of them. An Alpine miscellany, photographs, and here it is. He ordered it, paid for it, and in true John Cleare style, it is meticulously labelled. So where each picture has a very, very detailed index of where you are. So John's knowledge and category, how he categorises his pictures, is first rate. So I'm really looking forward to this, John, and I'm sure we'll all enjoy the afternoon very much indeed. So over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you for those kind words, Ingram, and hail everybody in the Alpine Ski Club. Here we go. We're on now. This is Dr. Tom Patey, probably the finest mountaineer of his generation and a good friend of mine. He was a very fine writer, he wrote in one of his articles that skiing was the art of climbing down gracefully for elderly mountaineers. He added to me personally that he thought it was superficial thrill-seeking for hooray Henrys. Now, I didn't take up skiing until I was in my 30s, probably as a consequence of climbing with Tom Patey. And the first time I put on skis was in 1968 with these two Olympic athletes, excellent Nordic skiers, and the commission was for me to ski across Scotland from Fort William to Stonehaven. It was a Chris Brasher and John Disley ploy. As you can see, we're leaving Glen Nevis off for travelling east. Well, of course, they knew what they were doing, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was also carrying 2 still cameras, a movie camera, and a load of bivouac equipment, and a bottle of whiskey, of course. But it was hard going on skis, which didn't really fit me, and which I had never used before. The main problem seemed to be crossing frozen rivers. Eventually we reached the railway at Corroa Summit, and then the weather broke. This was on our 3rd day out, and we managed to stand on the railway tracks and hitchhike a goods train, which took us down to Spain Bridge and back to civilization. The following year we tried again. This time I had some decent Nordic skis, not that I knew how to use them yet, but again the problems were the same sort of thing. You can't get good snow cover unless you're very lucky and it doesn't last forever. We ended up in McCook's cottage under Ben Alder, which is the most haunted place in Scotland, supposedly. And when the weather broke, we managed to get the train out of Dalwhinnie. The next spring, I had another go at skiing. It was January, and I was commissioned by an American film company to take stills on a film to be called Ski Dream at Verbier. Well, it was great fun. They were very good skiers. One was Dick Dorworth, very well-known Yosemite climbing pioneer and very strong skier, and Wayne Paulson, who actually held the world downhill speed record at the time. The trouble was, I couldn't ski. Nobody seemed to worry though, because I could get by, and we had great fun, and I learned quite a lot about skiing, technical terms and things, even though I couldn't use them. That same spring, I was back in the Alps again in March with this gentleman here, John Peacock, a stalwart of the Alpine Ski Club, a very fine skier, and John is skiing to work on the Brighthorn. The objective was to make a film for the BBC of a reconstruction, really, of Last Blue Mountain. You all know the story of Last Blue Mountain on Haramosh, and we were reconstructing it there. I was filming, I was cameraman and director, and we had a good team. Among them, of course, John, who was acting the part of John Emery, who was the survivor along with Tony Strether. And here is John playing the part of John Emery and me working. And playing the part of Tony Strether was Bill March, very fine ice climber who was deputy principal at Glenmore Lodge at the time. John here acting the part of John Emery, staggering down with horrific frostbite, the only survivor, along with Strether, on Last Blue Mountain. What was useful for me was learning to shoot. We got from a little igloo up on the Plateau Rosa, and we could shoot back to the Testagrinia hut over here, where we spent 2.5 weeks living and skiing. And we did manage actually to ski the Brighthorn, which was pretty good for me because I still didn't know how to stop and how to turn. The next spring took me to Everest. Now I put this in, the Kimbo Icefall here, because the Swiss in 1952, the year before, the autumn before the British climbed the mountain, two of the Swiss team managed to ski down through the icefall. But most especially because it drummed into me, climbing on a big mountain, that skis are a crucial part of mountaineering. Just as much as rock climbing is, just as much as ice climbing is, skiing is part of mountaineering. We were stuck on the mountain with a big storm. We had a 10-day storm at the head of Camp 2, and we were working up on the southwest face, and we were cut off. We could get no more supplies in. We ran out of food, we ran out of fuel, and after 10 days we did manage to get out when the weather changed and the snow blew away. This is the sort of conditions we were actually, this is Willans and John Evans, one of the American climbers, the head of Colorado Outward Bound, trying to fight their way out through the Western Cone. Had we had ski, all might have been different. Perhaps we might even have climbed the southwest face. When I got back home, I discovered that my wife had left me and she'd taken my infant daughter with her. and I suffered a very black period. And then one day, Roger Turner rang me up. Roger was an old friend of mine. He had a ski shop, a ski and climbing shop, one of the original ones up in Nottingham. And he rang me and he said, "John, I know you've always wanted to ski. Look, we're going off to Livigno for a week's package holiday. Why don't you come along and I'll see that you learn to ski." So Roger essentially taught me to ski, to stop, to turn, and really how to get on a ski lift, because I didn't know anything about those things. In those days, I used to spend a lot of time up at Glenmore Lodge in the winter on assignments of various kinds. And of course, skiing at Glenmore Lodge is a major activity. I did a lot of Nordic skiing with Rusty Bailey. It's good ski country around there. And of course, we did the four tops using skins. And I was learning more and more about how to ski. I wasn't very good at turning. I could stop without falling over. And I actually did ski with Rusty down the full length of Loch Arn on Nordics on the ice. Great fun, great fun. I was working a lot in America too at the time. And I found myself in Denver for a long weekend, one of the American holiday weekends. And I teamed up with an American girl I'd met in Canada the previous summer on Mount Robson. And she took me for 3 or 4 days up into the front range on Nordics. This again was a revolution to me because she used waxes and I didn't know anything about waxes, and waxing, as you all know, is a very fine art. And the wax she could use was completely different from the wax I could use. But of course, I was twice her weight. So I learned a little bit about waxing, but I wasn't there long enough to learn the whole lot. Anyway, back in Britain, I thought, well, I've heard of this high-level route, this HLR ski route. In fact, Bonington had recently done an article on it for the Telegraph magazine, and I thought, if Bonington can do the bloody ski route, well, so can I. I didn't know anything about it. Of course, I'd done it in summer and climbed every mountain on the way, traversed them, but familiar territory, but not in winter. So I put together a small team of 3 or 4 of my close climbing chums, only one of whom was an experienced skier, and we set off to Chamonix to do the HLR. Of course, to us, the Vallée Blanche was a high glacier traverse. For crevasses and things, the Géant icefall can be a little bit awkward in summer. So we were quite taken aback to find ourselves skiing down the Vallée Blanche with ice axes, crampons, ropes, rucksack, and all prepared to do crevasse rescues. And we found all these Hooray Henrys whizzing away down the Vallée Blanche. And as soon as it got difficult, they teamed in behind us, assuming that we knew what we were doing. Well, after a bit, we did learn what we were doing. We set off. Here we are going up to the Col de Chardonnay. Here's Hewell, of course, and here's the Mont Blanc de Chaillon going up the Haute Glacier de Seine, up onto the Pina de Rara via the Col de Serpentine, coming down off the Pina, having crossed the Col de Montbrûlé here, up on the Haute Glacier de Seine. This is all territory that you guys know very well. Heading for the Col de Valpelline and the Tête de Valpelline there, and the Tête Blanche. And then, of course, comes that fabulous moment when you cross the Col de Valpelline and the Matterhorn appears. That must be one of the most exciting bits of skiing in the whole Alps. And the Matterhorn grows on you, and there's the Zermatt Basin surrounded by its 4,000 meter peaks. And then you come whizzing down the Tiefmatten Glacier, and bang, Bill O'Connor goes into a hole. Actually, he stemmed right above this completely hidden crevasse. He stemmed and was on the length of the crevasse and went down nearly 40 feet. Well, we knew how to get him out. We were all pretty experienced glacier travelers, if not in winter, and we soon got a line down to him, and we got him out quite easily. But he was quite badly bruised, and he'd lost his 2 skis. Well, Johnny Fowler rappelled down while we were recovering and we were having a brew up, managed to get one of the skis, but Biggles Valley, again a member of the Alpine Ski Club and our good skier, our experienced skier on the trip, Biggles Valley managed to ski down to Zermatt on 1 ski. A remarkable stout effort. That autumn, I was back in the Himalaya. We were attempting a small peak called Kwangdi in the end of November, wintertime almost, and there were just 4 of us, and I went down with pneumonia. Here we are camped, our little base camp at 19,000 feet, with our doctor, who was an Australian dentist, but they say the dentists are better doctors on expeditions than real doctors. Anyway, he diagnosed pneumonia, and for some days I lay in the tent feeling bloody awful and dreaming. Every night I dreamt about the high-level route. I dreamt about great gleaming, glittering snowfields and the hissing of ski across the snow and climbing up through crisp against the sun through Stugi, and I determined that I would ski the haute route again and do it with some panache, which I did. And my American clients heard about this. Hey, you've done the HLR twice. Well, you better come over to Squaw and we're going to brief you for your next assignment. Well, I didn't find Squaw Valley a particularly exciting venue for downhill skiing. It was very, very efficient and everything worked, but the skiing was nothing like as exciting as some of the good places in the Alps. Well, I was briefed for a trip which, as the summer dawned, I found myself in Beijing, in the home of the great helmsman. The idea was that I should lead an American party up a mountain called Muztagh Ata in far western China, in Xinjiang actually, hard against the Soviet border, a mountain which had been skied twice. Once by a very powerful American party, Galen Roll and Dick Dorwith, who we've already met, and once by the Canadian Everest expedition in training, acclimatization training for the Canadian Everest expedition. Now, my American party were all experienced skiers, experienced mountaineers, but all being professional men, had very, very few weeks off. So the team, we had 21 days, sorry, we had 3 weeks, 21 days to Beijing, which was quite a time, short time, to climb a big mountain. Mr. Xu Ke-hua, who was the first Chinese to climb Everest from the north, well, the first man to climb Everest from the north, although he assumed that Mallory had actually got there first, which was quite a thing for a Chinese mountaineer to admit, because of course he was an honored master of sport and a very charming man. And he was my liaison officer. And with him, we flew over to Kashgar, hard against the Soviet border in Central Asia, a very strange city, not very high, only at 4,000 feet altitude, very much Central Asian, and peopled, of course, by the Weiwa people, Muslims, who are giving the Chinese a lot of trouble at the moment, or perhaps I should put it the other way, the Chinese are giving them a lot of aggro. We stayed in quite a smart hotel. We were probably the first people ever to stay there. My American party assembled and we organized lots of gear and set off on a 150-mile drive down what turned out to be the Karakoram Highway and also the Silk Road of Marco Polo down southward across the desert and into the mountains, into the Great Gez Gorge. Now the Gez Gorge takes the Gez River, which flows up into the Taklamakan Desert where it disappears, and it's the Karakoram Highway here is a dirt track, and we were not allowed to take photographs, so this is one, because the Chinese Liberation Army, every now and then we had to pull off and let great convoys of 100 trucks driving by. And my LO did assure me that although we weren't allowed to take pictures, he was allowed to tell me what they were doing. And they were carrying weapons and food into the corridor to fuel the Mujahideen fighting the Russians, who then were occupying Afghanistan. We also managed to get rid of that. Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of, okay. I'll go back one. This is the Gez Matterhorn, one of the mountains we were able to photograph on the way. And here we go again. Here's our old truck coming along with all our gear. This was the first sight we got of the mountain. It appeared huge from a distance and rather intimidating. A couple of hours later, we pulled in below it into a great wide strath where there's some glacial lakes, and we could see a bit more of it. Obviously, the north face of the mountain is very impressive, but it does have fairly easy slopes on the other side. And eventually we were dropped off at the roadhead at 12,500 feet, a grassy Pamir here, and the Silk Road, the Karakoram Highway, disappears over that pass over there in the distance. These are local Kyrgyz tribesmen who in the area run their camels, and of course it's good territory for camels. We set up a base camp on the, well, a base camp -1 actually on the grass here, and knowing that we had 21 days to climb the mountain from base camp to base camp. In 21 days, the bus and the truck were coming to pick us up. It was quite a tight slot. Now we were preparing all our logistics there. We had a set off for base camp, looking up at the mountain, and into camp struggled a rather gripped up American. He was leader of a Colorado expedition who, unbeknown to me, had had a slot ahead of us on the mountain. He'd lost his 2 lead climbers. The rest of the expedition had been able to follow, and his 2 lead climbers had disappeared. And he briefed us. He said, you know, if you find them, they're probably diaries or something. We want to know what's happened. Well, what was an air of holiday turned into really realizing we were on a big, serious mountain. It may not have been a difficult mountain, but nothing is easy at nearly 25,000 feet. And I rather suspected that our 2 Americans had done a big ski jump down the huge cliffs which break the mountain up. But it was an interesting day and a half waiting for the Kyrgyz. Here's an old Kyrgyz man riding a donkey, a picture I shot, which rather attracted me. And here they are crossing the river. That, incidentally, is Konga, the peak which Bonington had climbed the previous year. The local nomads brought in 16 camels for us to get to base camp. A camel will carry 150 pounds, but they're not very pleasant animals. Here's all our gear, and up at base camp where it occasionally snows. Well, we spent a day walking up to base camp. The camp is somewhere over here, and it's quite a long way. It's 7 or 8 hours across the plains here and desolate area up to base camp, which was just in a hollow below the glacier here. My plan was to climb this ridge here up to the summit without falling over the cliffs. Other expeditions, I think, had used this particular ridge, but this seemed a better ridge to me. Nobody knew very much about it, except Galen Roll and Dorworth, who'd given me a certain amount of briefing. And we set up nice base camp in a little hollow underneath the screes leading up to the snow line. Now, I had a deputy leader in Steve McKinney. Now, Steve was a very strong American skier, not a very experienced expedition man, but he was a climber too, of course. And he, at that moment, did hold the world speed downhill record. So he was a professional downhill skier. And our first 2,000 feet of ascent would be up to the snow line. My plan was to acclimatize properly. It was the only way I was going to get amateurs up to the summit safely. And I decided we would spend 3 days on each 2,000 feet section. We would climb up with a load for 2,000 feet or so, find a campsite and dump, ski back down. Next day, do the same. Next day, the same, but occupy the camp, and then the following day, push up to find the next campsite. Well, this worked very well, even for Norman Croucher, who was the one other Brit in the party. Now, Norman has climbed more high mountains than most people. He has 2 tin legs. He lost his legs below the knee, and he is as strong as an ox and very game and brilliant company. And Norman was seeing what he could do using Nordic skis to climb with skins, and hoping to ski, well, to toboggan down by affixing his Nordic skis onto a pack frame, a metal pack frame, clipping them on and tobogganing. Well, he soon discovered that that was not the way to proceed. Anyway, here's Norman, and here we are at Camp 1, right on the snow line. That's snow over there, snow patches, and Camp 1 was not a very comfortable camp, but it worked. We weren't going to spend much time there except sleeping. Well, the first section up to Camp 2, which we were going to establish at just over 19,000 feet, was icefall. A lot of seracs weaving your way through an icefall. The only place we actually roped up, and we marked the route very carefully and established Camp 2 without any problems. Camp 2 was almost on the edge of the big cliffs. Now, the big cliff, this is the great void, and the cliff drops off over there. Everybody got up here, but one of the doctors, I had 5 doctors on the trip, 5 qualified medical men. One of the doctors decided it was too much and went down to pick flowers among the moraines. But the 2 girls and Norman came up here, and the girls decided they wouldn't go any higher, but they would remain in support here and enjoy just being high on the mountain. And so we pushed on to establish a Camp 3. There's Camp 2, and there's the big cliff, and we have to be careful to avoid the edge here and ski off around the corner into the icefall. Well, notice a wand. I had decided that it was essential to mark our route with wands. Every day we ran into whiteout conditions quite soon. We'd been going half an hour, not very high above the camp, and the mist rolled in and it snowed lightly, covering up our tracks. So on every wand, I placed another one. I took a compass bearing to the previous one just before it disappeared and marked it with a felt tip on the little marker I had on the wands. And consequently, we never lost an hour. We climbed and skied back down. We never missed our route and climbed up to where we were looking for a camp 3. We found a good site underneath a bit of a serac, giving some shelter, and lo and behold, there was a tent there. We crawled into the tent and we found it stuffed with food, freeze-dried ice cream, prawns in aspic, a lot of very expensive freeze-dried American food, and a tape machine, a tape recorder with a disc of Chariots of Fire, which of course was the theme song of Britain just before we left. So we played Chariots of Fire and ate ourselves silly. There were also gyres, and this had been the Colorado High Camp. The 2 guys had got here, set off for the top and disappeared, and the rest of the expedition hadn't been able to get this high. Presumably they hadn't acclimatized. Well, it saved us the trouble of unpacking another tent, and we settled in comfortably, and before we could get any higher, the weather broke. It was a nice evening. We looked out over the distant Pamirs. Here's our little camp, nice bit of shelter, but the storm came in, and every time the storm eased, we had to deal with our stoves. The Chinese paraffin wasn't very good, and for 2 days we couldn't move. We were stuck in the tent, in our 2 tents, 3 in each tent, and here is Steve and one of the other American guys, and this is Bob. We shall see quite a bit of Bob later, because Bob was an anesthesiologist in Los Angeles, a little guy, not terribly big, and he kept crawling into our tent next door and saying, "Hey, John, we gotta go, we gotta go." I said, "Bob, if you want me to keep you alive, and my job is to keep you alive rather than climb the mountain, that's a secondary objective, go outside because you're going to die." "No, John, we got to go. We can get out in this. It's bloody white out outside." It was really blowing a hurler. And I said, "At this altitude, you will go out and die." "Oh, you're a limey. You're a chicken, John." And the other Americans said, "Oh, yeah, John's okay. He might be a limey. He's okay." But I had a bit of trouble with Bob. But eventually, on the second afternoon, the weather cleared. There was no point in going out. But we went out early next morning, and just up the slope, there was a black dot. And as we skied up to it, it was several hundred yards up the slope, I realized there was a man there. And I thought it must be one of the dead Americans. But no, it was Ted, who had been down at base camp with amoebic dysentery, or at least that was diagnosed by our 5 doctors. And it seemed that Ted had recovered from amoebic dysentery, found his way back up the mountain because, of course, it was well marked, spent the storm at Camp 2 being looked after by the 2 girls and Norman, and when the weather cleared the previous afternoon, had pushed up following my wands, but he couldn't find the camp. He couldn't find the tent, and he'd had to dig a snow hole and was lying in it in a very bad way. He had bad frostbite and was suffering from slow blindness. Well, I had to rehang the expedition. He had threatened to climb the mountain on his own if I didn't get him there. If I had had Sherpas, if we'd been in Nepal, I'd have had him because he was jeopardizing the whole trip for everybody else. But I broke the party into 2 then. I sent Steve down to get more supplies and another sleeping bag, and I took the other 3 guys up to establish 4. Well, we established 4 at 23,000 feet, leaving only 1,500 feet to go to the top. We had to cut 4 into the ice slope. It was quite steep just there. And once again, we had another storm. We spent a whole day worried about our time scale because time was running short and we had to be at the roadhead on a certain day. But the weather cleared after a day and we set off for the top. It was just a question of going straight up. No seracs, no crevasses, just up onto a summit plateau covered in iron-hard sastrugi. Quite difficult skiing, and you had to be very careful because it wasn't a place to break an ankle. Here is the summit, and here am I approaching it, shot by one of the other guys. Well, we gathered round, having been to the top, very strong wind blowing, we gathered round to break out our Hershey bars and Kendal mint cake, and I turned to offer Bob a piece of mint cake, and I realized that Bob, that's Bob there, was standing up on the summit, and he bent down and to his rucksack, pulled out a polythene bag and shook it into the wind, and grey dust floated off across China. And he stumbled down and put his arm around my shoulder and said, "I'm sorry, John, I'm sorry." "What are you sorry for, Bob?" I said. "Oh, I made your life a misery." I said, "Yes, you have. You've been trying to egg me on." And he said, I had to do that. I had to get to the top. That was my brother I was shaking out into the mist. Those were his ashes. I promised to get him there. "Well, you've done that now, Bob. I forgive you." So we set off down. We cleared the mountain actually in 2 days. We took everything down off us, and this is one of the other strong guys, and he, a schoolmaster in New England, a good man, and we weighed in our sacks at 90 pounds when we got down to base camp. Now, at 90 pounds, you can't turn. You just have to side slip all the way. But Norman got to the top with Steve and on his little snowshoes, and Ted got up there on a tight rope. He had to throw his glasses away, went completely snowblind, and he came down on a tight rope in crampons. So everybody was satisfied. Everybody who made a attempt to the top got there, and there's Norman at Roadhead Camp just before the trucks came in to pick us up, and Ted, who the doctors assured me would be very pleased to be bound up for his snow blindness all the way back to Beijing, which he was. And of course the Chinese get very happy about these things, and it was parties all the way back to Beijing. Here's our LO, the interpreter, and the others. Well, having climbed Muztagh Ata, at the time the highest mountain ever climbed on ski, I don't say skied down, but climbed up on ski, and the first commercial party ever to climb it, I was asked to go on a lecture tour around the Antipodes. Australia was great, mostly hot. We did a lot of desert travel in Australia, but also some skiing in the snowy around the snow gums at about 6,500 feet. Actually rather nice, excellent place to go Nordic skiing. But New Zealand was really the place for skiing. The New Zealand Alps are very, very impressive, and particularly Mount Cook. It's only 12,500 feet, the highest peak there, but it's a very fine mountain and actually very formidable. This is an aerial picture taken as we flew into the Murchison Amphitheatre for 3 or 4 days ski mountaineering with a couple of my hosts, Colin Monteith, the famous New Zealand and Antarctic photographer, and his oppo Bill King. And we just landed in the Murchison Amphitheatre, and we're going to ski up, quite a way up the slope there, to the Murchison Hut. Now the Murchison Hut is at 6,000 feet, a typical New Zealand Alpine Club hut. Radio telephone, and you're expected to check in with the rangers at Mount Cook Village, the Hermitage, every day, so they know where you are and know what you're doing. So climbing in New Zealand, alpinism, because it is certainly very fine alpinism, is a very serious business and taken not lightly at all. Well, from here we climbed around in the head of the Murchison Amphitheatre. That's a beautiful mountain called Graceful Peak, which we shall see later. And we climbed up onto the Classen Saddle here. That's Graceful Peak again in the distance. Some very interesting climbing through the icefall here, and very good views of mountains and mountains going away into infinity in every direction. Now, the Murchison hut is actually on that little ledge there, and here is the Tasman Saddle, the famous Tasman Saddle, over which is the Tasman Glacier and Mount Cook, and there's Graceful Peak, which we shall see. Well, eventually we had to climb up to the Tasman Saddle, below Mount Graceful there, and on the Tasman Saddle is the Tasman Saddle Hut. Quite a big hut, much bigger than the little Murchison hut. And here's the Tasman Glacier going all the way down to below Mount Cook, and here is Mount Tasman itself. We were rather taken aback, at least I was, but our New Zealand chums knew that it happened, to find that just on the Tasman Saddle itself, just below the saddle, light planes, ski planes, were flying a shuttle service in, taking rich Japanese tourists, dumping them up there, and they would be guided to ski down the Tasman Glacier to beginning where the steepness ends, and picking up the airplane again and flying back and doing it again and again and again and again. So there was a bit of noise, but we managed to avoid it. They stopped at midday when the snow got slightly different. So it didn't give us too much trouble. We climbed up onto the Great Divide at a place called the, not the Classen Saddle, I forget the name of it anyway. That's Mount Graceful Peak. And this is the divide, the Great Divide that runs all the way up South Island of New Zealand. Again, mountains on every side, all 7, 8, 9, 10,000 feet. So much climbing and so much skiing that, well, you could live a lifetime out there and enjoy yourself. The Tasman Glacier itself was, I suppose, a bit of an anticlimax. The skiing was very easy. It's 10 miles descent, 4,500 feet descent, and the exciting thing about it is the great avenue of peaks through which you ski. The last 2 miles, to make it a 12-mile descent altogether, there's 2 miles of flat. Here's Mount Cook, and the regular route on Mount Cook lies up here. And when you ski down the steepness, you've got 2 miles of flat ground, which isn't terribly difficult. There are no great moraines. So it's fairly easy on ski. You just whip your skins off and skate down there. But then you've got to climb up to the ball hut and another 2 miles of slogging along a rough track before you reach a roadhead, and then 10 miles to Mount Cook village itself. North Island, New Zealand, is actually very different. This is Mount Ruapehu, which is 9,177 feet high, and an active volcano. It's got actually 5 summits, although whether it has 5 summits now, I hate to think, because in the last few months there's been a disastrous eruption from Ruapehu, and it may not be quite like this anymore. This is the north side of Ruapehu, looking out to another active volcano called Ngauruhoe, which is about 2,000 feet lower. Now, there's very good skiing on Ruapehu. There's a little ski resort down there, and cable cars and ski lifts and things, and a ski area called the Wakapapa ski area. But we were doing a bit sterner stuff, and with one of the rangers and my New Zealand host, we skied to the summit of the mountain, where there is the most wonderful, or there was the most wonderful, crater lake, and it steams. And the boys told me that, in fact, you could swim in it, although we didn't decide to go that far. Actually, cut into the summit is a bomb-proof shelter. The rangers go up there every now and then to check on seismological data, and if there was a hint of an eruption up there, they could climb down a ladder into this bomb-proof shelter and spend several days there until the minor eruptions passed. Whether it's still there or not, I hate to think. But there's very good skiing down the steeper parts of the summit, and excellent touring round the base of the mountain above the ski resort, always with this wonderful view of distant snow-covered volcanoes. And with any luck, of course, you might find yourself in a nice hot spring at the end of the day. Now, the next few years, I spent grabbing ski tours in the Alps whenever I could, and a couple of ski tours in the California Sierra. But I had plenty of other things to do, so I wasn't skiing every year, but I did manage every opportunity presented itself to ski in Britain. This is a very good trip I did with Johnny Noble, who many of you will know, and his then wife. We did a circuit of Kentmere over High Street and the Lake District Fells. Great fun, actually, on Nordics. And then one winter, on the only day when it was possible, we skied the Brecon Beacons with Biggles Valley, Alpine Ski Club member who you've already met, and Ian McMorrin, who ran the one of the outdoor centres in the area, and an old Antarctic chum. And we used the wrong kind of skis. We used Alpine skis and skins, and it would be much better on Nordics. But it was a good trip. It was the only day possible. And the interesting thing about skiing in the British Isles, it's almost invariably the middle of winter, and is the low sun you get. Long shadows, atmosphere that you don't get, of course, skiing in the Alps where the sun is much higher, and you certainly don't get in the Himalaya. I love this low sun and big blue shadows. It really makes skiing very atmospheric in the British hills in winter. Another interesting place I found myself skiing at this time was the Picos de Europa, northern Spain, the Cordillera Cantabrica, but it's the finest group in the Cordillera Cantabrica, which are very like Scotland, actually, if a couple of thousand feet higher. And you can actually get up into the central part, the central massif of the Picos, which are the highest ones, running to 8,500 feet. There's a cable car, the one cable car system, which is down there, out of sight. And a couple of hours climbing up a track, skiing on skins up a track, will take you to the Veronica hut. It's actually a Guardian hut, and it's an old gun turret or radar turret off a Spanish battleship. I don't know what happened to the battleship, but the turret remained here, and you get off into the mountains themselves. Well, they're rather strange. They are not recommended for ski touring or indeed for skiing, but it's rather interesting for 4 or 5 days exploring the place. The interesting thing about them are these great round hollows called hoyas, of which there is no outlet. It's limestone country, of course, and presumably the water drains out from the bottom of these hollows, which can be a whole kilometre across, and they're a couple of thousand feet deep, and you ski them by going round and round and round, like a wall of death, just getting lower and lower and lower. And if you want to go fast, you make it a bit steeper, and if you want to go slowly, you make it a bit easier angle. But of course, when you get to the bottom of the Hoya, you've got to ski all the way up again. But it's rather fun. Now, I joined the Alpine Ski Club after the Muztagh Ata expedition. I'd never heard of the club at that stage, and John Harding invited me to join, and I joined. And in 1993, I found myself president of the club. And I thought, well, as I'm president, we ought to go back to the Himalaya and do something. So I applied for permission to attempt to ski Trestle. Now, I knew Trestle was possible because Tom Larkstaff had climbed it without much trouble, and it had, at that stage, not been climbed on ski. So I thought, well, why not have a go? Well, the Indians refused my permit, but they said you can go and attempt Kedar Dome. Now, I knew Kedar Dome because I'd seen it. I'd been up to the foot of the mountain, in fact, a couple of times. The last time, a couple of years before, I'd been up there in high summer to shoot a clothing catalogue for Rohan, the rather smart outdoor equipment clothing. And this is one of my fun pictures shot on the river Ganges, because the Ganges rises up there. Up here it's called the Bhagirathi River, and this is the Ganges flowing through one of the gorges some little way down from the mountain. And this is one of the pages from the catalogue. Anyway, we set off there, a little Alpine Ski Club expedition, 4 of us, up to the snout of the Great Gangotri Glacier, which is a pilgrim venue, being the source of the Ganges. Now, the source is actually, I don't know what's happening here. Here we go. Here we go, yes. This is the Ganges, the Bhagirathi, flowing out of the snout of the Gangotri Glacier, one of the longest in the Alps, incidentally. Well, our mountain was some way up the Gangotri Glacier, and we climbed a couple of thousand feet up to a place called Tapovan Meadow, below Shivling. Now, Tapovan Meadow in summer is a beautiful grassy meadow, quite extensive, with wildflowers all over it, long grass and little tinkling streams. In the Mulda of where obviously several glaciers are joining, and it's dominated by Trisul, by Shivling. And Shivling is 21,500 feet high and looks incredibly formidable. After all, it is Shiva's ling. Now, the easy way up Shivling is fairly serious, but it's not desperately difficult, is just round the corner here. But there's lots of very hard climbing. Anyway, we established our base camp on Tapovan Meadow. Here is our little camp here. It gave us some very nice dawns, but we had a very short time on the mountain. We had precisely 2 weeks to climb the mountain, base camp to base camp, and we didn't have much time to waste. But the team, there were 4 of us, was quite a strong team, although our average age was over 50. Hugh Lloyd, who you all know, of course, myself, Rodney Franklin, the baby of the team, a heart surgeon, and of course our doctor, and John Fairley, another stalwart of the club, and a lovely lady, Dr. Abhijit Sawani, a recently qualified medical doctor who was the first female liaison officer issued to us by the Indian Mountaineering Federation. So this is shot at base camp before we set off. Not to forget our excellent cook, Bam Bada, and his oppo here, who were always ready with plenty of good tea and excellent chapatis. Now, this is the Gangotri Glacier, and we had to get up this glacier some 5 miles, and it's a mile wide and covered in huge, nasty moraines. To get to the glacier was a steep descent from the end of Tapovan Meadow. Here's Rodney, actually very much our best skier, fighting his way down steep slopes into the Mulda of the glacier. The Mulda was obviously the way up the glacier, but it was very difficult on skins or not on skins. It would have been considerably easier on Nordics, I think, but did we wear skins or didn't we? So it was quite difficult, and it took us 5.5 hours to get up to just in here where our subsidiary glacier, the Kirti Bamak, lay, and here we are coming off the Gangotri Glacier onto the Kirti Bamak Glacier with these incredible mountains in the background. It's a very impressive place for mountains on the Gangotri. So we arrived and managed to do our 3 carries up to an advanced base camp beside the Kirti Bamak Glacier, and saw our mountain for the very first time. Now my plan was to climb up this ridge here, which is the obvious way up the mountain, a fairly easy angled climb up to the roof here, which was heavily crevassed, lots of seracs and things, which would obviously be slightly different ball game up there. And I would place a camp down here, I hoped, and a camp up here at the base of the roof, and we hoped crack the mountain and be back in camp in time for our porters to pick us up on a certain specific day so we could catch specific flights home. It didn't give us very much time. It gave us, in fact, 12 days. So we set off from our advanced base camp and we set off across the Kirti-Bamak Glacier. Well, the Kirti-Bamak Glacier is again a glacier up and down, down and up. And our advanced base camp was at 15,000, just over 15,000 feet. And I was hoping to place Camp 1 at 17 across the glacier. Well, it was again one of these glacier crossing areas on the mountain itself, where we were skiing up through a series of rather nice hollows, easy skiing, nice slopes, and good acclimatization. Our base camp, our advanced base, is just down here, the other side of the Kirti-Bamak Glacier, and of course the Gangotri Glacier beyond. And so we pushed up and established a Camp 1 at 17,000. We made it out to be 17,125 feet on a safe little ledge at the little way up our ridge, with these fantastic view of Shivling from the south. The Gangotri Glacier surprisingly flows south to north, and then turns a big bend through the Himalaya to flow down and to become the Ganges. But this is the success of Shivling, which the previous couple of years earlier, Bonington had made a climb up this particular ridge here. We established ourselves, four of us, in quite a large tent, but it was tight, with good rations, hoping that we might push on after a couple of carries up to establish Camp 2 and then make the summit. So the weather dawned fairly well up before dawn, and it always takes time to get away on these things. And we set off up the ridge, hoping that we were going to find a good site for our Camp 2. Well, at first the going was not terribly difficult. There were four of us. We didn't have to ski right up close together. We spaced out a bit and enjoyed the skiing. We didn't anticipate any crevasses. It was all good snow. And Johnny Fairley was carrying the ones and placing them, again, quite easily because there was plenty of visibility, but placing them and noting compass bearings. The going was, as I said, fairly straightforward. And in due course, I could see the foot of the steep roof, and I could make out seracs there. And I thought, well, in an hour, we shall be in among those seracs and we'll get a good pitch, dump our gear, and have an enjoyable ski down. But it was already clouding up. And a little bit later, indeed, there was a ring round the sun. It didn't look too good. Rodney was out in front, and Huel and I caught up with Rodney, and Johnny came up, and it started to snow. And we thought, well, there's no point in going on. We're quite close to the campsite. Let's dump our gear and whiz back down and come up tomorrow, hoping it's just a small snow shower. So we dug a big hole and we buried our gear, everything we were carrying, which was a full load, but it was all things like crampons and a rope and a stove, a spare stove, and fuel and one ration pack, but nothing like sleeping bags and important gear like that. So we buried it and plumped all the marker ones on top to mark it with the little red flags flying, and turned round and started to ski back down into what turned out to be a blizzard. There was lightning, thunder crashing all round, visibility nil, and the thunder and lightning was all round us. All our gear, metal gear, was humming, and we kept being knocked over by the lightning or the thunder, whatever it was. We kept finding ourselves on our faces, and one side of the ridge was easy angle, the other side was steep cliffs, and we kept finding ourselves right on the edge of the cliffs. Had it not been for the marker ones that Johnny had placed, we possibly would never have got down. But the weather worsened and we had great difficulty finding our tent. We avalanched our way into it, dug our way in, and spent the night brewing up and wondering what the hell was going on. Eventually in the morning we woke up and the sky was clear, and we dug ourselves out. It was obvious that things weren't going too well. The slope was avalanche. Avalanche conditions were all around us. It was freezing now, of course, and there was very frightening thoughts of avalanches where we'd just been, and indeed what was below us. We thought it best to get down to advanced base, but we couldn't go back the way we'd come. That was too dangerous, and we managed to find a circuitous route which took us down difficult ground, which was obviously safe from avalanche, and then back across the glacier to advanced base over there. Well, we dug out advanced base and moved in and had a good meal and realized everything was plastered. And in fact, the Council of War realized that we weren't going up again. We had to be at base camp in 3 days' time, and in 3 days there was no time to wait for anything to the snow to get decent and avalanche risk to be reasonable. So we packed up, and really better luck than judgment, skied back down the glacier with big packs and I suppose heavy hearts, but we'd had a good go at it, and it had been very impressive country. We dug our way into advanced base, where our cooks and Abhijit looked after us. And it started snowing again, and it snowed for 12 hours and stopped for a few hours, and then snowed again for 12 hours, and every day it snowed, and we realized that we had done the right thing. Abhijit, as I mentioned before, was a very good masseuse, and we had a good holiday, if indeed you can call it a holiday, waiting for our porters. They eventually turned up. We packed up camp and found our way back down the Ganges, back to Delhi, back to the airplane, and back to Europe. And for the next 15 years, I went to the Alps every year religiously on Alpine ski tours. Back to the gentle, friendly Alps. Back to steep slopes on small mountains which give an enjoyable climb. Back to steep slopes on slightly bigger mountains which give a really enjoyable slide down. Back to comfortable huts, back to excellent company and a glass of what does you good, and great fun in friendly mountains. And then my quadricep was snapped, and then the arthritis caught up with me, and then my knees went, and I took to mountain biking. And that, I think, is probably one way of climbing down gracefully. Thank you. And I will click the Q&A. You are a legend and have been inspiration for all my recent. That's very kind of you, David. You too, of course, are a legend. Far more of a legend than I am. I'm only a humble photographer. But thank you very much indeed. No more open questions.
So, any more questions from people? There must be a question.
Right. Well, there we are.
Oh,
That's unusual.
well, let's see. There may be a question coming. Yeah, right. But if not, I think over to you, Ingram.
John, that was absolutely amazing. It was beautiful. We've heard your story of Muztagh Ata many a time, but it was very good. We haven't actually seen all those photographs of it, and good to see Kedar Dome again, and what terrible weather you'd had. Yeah. The weather takes everything, and that's it. As you say, it's always good to return. But good days in the hills always, and you illustrated that so well. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, you
have been an inspiration to us all.
The big trouble with any expedition, as amateurs, is you have to organise your trip home. You have a flight booked.
Yeah.
If you don't catch it, you've missed your plane. If you're a big expedition going off for the summer to a big mountain somewhere, when you finish, you come home. But all my trips in Nepal have been open-ended, and when you get back to Kathmandu, you see where the flights are going, and you get on the next available one. But
yes,
it worked like that.
John, a little bit you didn't tell us about, which I always find incredibly fascinating. If you could just tell people a little bit about as you were a cameraman on the Eiger Sanction, which was always a very good yarn to tell. You were filming Clint Eastwood, and
oh yes, well that's that wasn't skiing. That was high.
No, but it was good mountaineering.
It was mountaineering of the sort. It was staying alive. Eastwood was a very brave man. He did things which a lot of us wouldn't do. And when you read Hamish McInnes's biography is due out quite soon, and Hamish has quite a lot to say about that. And there's also a new biography of Dougal Haston coming out quite soon, in which there'll be quite a lot about Eiger Sanction. There'll be a bit in my autobiography when it comes out, which I'm working on, but it's there's quite a lot of tying up to do, and then I've got to find a publisher, although I might publish it myself. Which is, the way to publish what you want to publish. My experience of publishers is they You know, they want to do the book as cheaply as possible, and that's not the way to produce the best book.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Right. Yeah, we've actually got two more questions coming, John. So
Please,
yeah,
written ones
Yeah.
or verbal.
so there's one from Rodney. Can you see that?
Oh, there's Rodney. Click on Rodney Franklin.
No.
Open that.
Click on the Q&A.
Roger, can you read them out?
Okay. Yes, Rodney. Wonderful talk. Thank you. You forgot to mention the snow leopard we found at Advanced Base Camp on our way down the Kedar. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Rodney. Great to hear from you again. I missed out a few interesting, or probably less interesting things, but interesting to you and me and Hewell and those of us who were there. It was a bit of a rushed, potted story about the trip, but it was a good trip, and I often think of you and often think that, you know, if the weather had been better, we'd have sapped that mountain. Anyway, hope you're doing well, and good to hear from you again.
Yep.
And Mickey Clark, such an inspiration. Thank you for your lecture. It was wonderful hearing your experiences. A quick question. Party members, better their ability on the mountain or their ability with their personality? Absolutely. Absolutely. Although ideally both. You want people you get on with. And on Muztagh Ata, we got on, except for Bob, extremely well. Americans, in my experience, are usually very nice, hospitable people, particularly the ones who climb mountains. And our Chinese friends were great. There's a bit of a story actually about Ted. Ted was a German who had emigrated to America and still had German nationality. He was on a German passport, and he had a printing shop in Los Angeles. He was a professional printer, a little small printing shop. And he was obviously a very strong man and very determined, and was determined to climb the mountain. His father had died at Stalingrad, and he wanted to prove something, I think. And he told us all about that. And Ted had, as I mentioned, he'd been diagnosed with amoebic dysentery, but it was obviously just probably the shits. And he climbed all the way back on his own, against my instructions, and found himself in this snow hole in a bad way. Anyway, as I said, we got him to the top. We had no alternative. He would have called our bluff and followed us and probably died, or certainly jeopardized the expedition. Anyway, we got him back to Beijing eventually, and we missed all our flights, or there weren't flights. We were stuck in Beijing for 4 or 5 days, where the Chinese kept entertaining us. They took us to the Beijing duck restaurant, where the food was disgusting. It was much better in Kashgar. But one day the liaison officer came to me and he said, John, Mr. Ted has gone. He's not in the hotel anymore. And the police will be very worried. You will be in big trouble as you're the expedition leader. You're responsible for him. So we searched and we found no Ted. And it turned out that Ted had determined to get home, back to the States, and he had found a taxi rank. China had only opened the previous year, but there were already taxis, and he'd persuaded a taxi to take him to the airport, chatted up various airlines, found a spare seat on an aircraft flying back to Los Angeles, and disappeared. And we did have a phone communication with my clients in San Francisco, And I rang them and said, look, please check to see if Ted is there, because he's disappeared from here and the secret police are onto me. And they sent someone around to his place in LA, and indeed they found Ted at home, and they gave him a really big wigging, and I got into a certain amount of trouble because I should have known exactly where he'd gone, but he crept out at night, and of course put the whole team in the khaki. But you know, you meet them.
Yes, yes. A difficult thing.
Yeah, right. So another question from Stephen.
Stephen, thank you, Stephen, the master storyteller. Of course, not a doubt further. Was that stationary body I recognised on a Scottish ski with Braysher and Disley?
Kentish, I think.
Steve, I don't know whether it was the first body, that particular one, up Glen Nevis. It's a day up from Roadhead in Glen Nevis, and we got up to the body and moved in, and then the ghillie turned up, and of course we were loaded with whiskey, and we had a really brilliant night with the ghillie and Braysher and Disley, and a bottle of scotch. But the next year we stayed there again, but there was no ghillie the next year, and we had Eric Landmuir with us. So there were four of us the next time, and Eric knew all about McCook's cottage on Loch Eric at the bottom of Ben Alder, which we had great difficulty coming down off Ben Alder because the weather had already broken, and we came down this long couloir, and we were using, of course, Nordics, and we were using waxes, and every probably 300 or 400 feet, we had to stop and change waxes as the temperature and humidity changed. So it was a horrible descent. It was much easier climbing. Anyway, McCook's cottage. I don't know whether you know the story of McCook's cottage. Soon after the war, a party over New Year, a Scottish party, a family party. There were girls and young women in the party, sisters and fathers and grown-up children, and they set off from Rannoch Station to slog up Loch Eric to stay in McCook's. And McCook's is on the site of Prince Charlie's body, one of Prince Charlie's places that he hid out after the 45. And they were caught in a storm, a blizzard. And they all died in the drifts except one person, who a search party some days later found stark staring mad, alone in the body. But Langmuir had a brother, and the brother with I think Edinburgh University party arrived at McCook's one day. They were hill walking. They were doing what they do in Scotland.
Oh, sorry.
And they arrived at McCook's and settled in. There's only two rooms with a little sort of hall and a little woodshed round the back. And they woke up in the middle of the night and there was a fire burning in the grate. They said, "What, did you light a fire?" No. What's going on? What's going on? And there was a fire burning in the grate. And they leapt to their feet and burst into the other room, which was adjoining, and their rucksacks were there, and there was a letter, a sheet of paper torn out of a notebook, lined paper, with in copperplate handwriting, "You are not wanted here. You must leave at once," in very Victorian, Edwardian copperplate handwriting. And they were so scared that they packed up there and then and rushed out and made their way back to Dalwhinnie. So Eric regaled us with these stories. But, you know, we had a long slog out until we were eventually picked up by a ghillie and a Land Rover at some lodge down there and made our way back to in the pouring rain. But the next year, Eric Langmuir and Braysher attempted it from Stonehaven, and they got as far as the White Mount and were really blizzarded in on the White Mount, and were actually quite lucky to get down to one of the glens and, you know, knock on the door of a farmhouse and ask for shelter. Eventually, I gather, a party of French mountaineers who were come over to climb on Ben Nevis, eventually they, I think, skied across Scotland, but the conditions were right and they went over Rannoch Moor instead of Braysher's route, which was bodying all the way. And I don't suppose they did it properly, like we would have done. Yes, a long way from Glen Nevis, bloody cold indeed. Indeed, crossing the frozen rivers was the was the problem. But on Nordic skis, you don't float very well. Yes, Roger. Live question. Any more? Open? Dismissed? No more open questions. Any more? Q&A? Press that one. That's it.
I think that's the questions, John. So Ingram, over to you to wrap it up.
Well, John, thank you very much indeed. And we're just delighted. So that's been our first Zoom lecture, and I hope everybody has enjoyed it very much. And Roger, thank you very much indeed for setting it all up. So we're now reasonably confident now in possibly doing another one.
Roger did brilliantly. Thank you very much, Roger. It's obviously a complicated business, and I hope I didn't screw up at all, or one or two other things came up. I think one of my menus suddenly appeared on screen for some reason.
No.
I don't know.
Anyway.
No, it's excellent, John.
And, you know, thank you for coming all the way down here and making it work.
Yes.
No, we're delighted, John. Thank you very much indeed. I don't think there's really anything else. We keep posting out for members, but maybe we'll see members at the Lake District meet at the end of July, and then probably the dinner in November. And if anybody's got any ideas for lectures that they'd like to have, or and speakers, we're always interested in having those. And just email us if you need anything else. And I'm sure John would be very happy to share, being very naughty for you, John, if anybody needs particular interest, because he is an absolute fund of information, I can't tell you, and you'll get very good, accurate information from John. So,
Well, I hope it.
yes, no, absolutely, John. Thank you very much indeed. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, and I hope you have a good wet weekend in Mulgrave, or sunny weekend somewhere else in the UK.